Most people don't realize when it starts happening because it doesn't arrive loudly, it doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't feel like danger at first. It feels like staying connected, staying visible, staying involved, as if being seen is the same thing as being alive. There is a quiet moment, usually ignored, when the mind notices it has no space left, no untouched corners, no place where a thought can exist without being interrupted, judged, or reshaped by the presence of someone else's attention. And instead of questioning that loss, most people fill it faster. They talk more, they share more, they explain themselves before anyone asks. They mistake movement for progress and noise for meaning, never noticing that the more exposed their inner world becomes, the less control they seem to have over it. There is something unsettling about silence, not because it is empty, but because it removes the audience. And without an audience, there is nothing to perform, nothing to defend, nothing to decorate. That is where most people turn back. Not because they are weak, but because being alone with one's own thoughts reveals patterns that can no longer be blamed on circumstances, on people, on timing, or on luck. It reveals responsibility. At some point, usually unnoticed, a subtle trade is made. Privacy is exchanged for reassurance, solitude is exchanged for approval, and control is exchanged for comfort. Not dramatically, not consciously, but gradually, until the mind starts asking for permission before it commits to a direction. This is how momentum dies quietly, not through failure, but through exposure, not through loss, but through constant access. Because once everything inside is visible, it becomes touchable, interruptible, influenceable, and eventually steerable by forces that do not share the same destination. What feels like openness often becomes leakage. What feels like connection often becomes dependency. And what feels like being understood slowly turns into being shaped. There is a reason clarity often appears only after distance is created, a reason why insight tends to arrive when voices fade and expectations fall away. But distance has a cost. It removes familiar warmth. It removes constant validation. It removes the illusion that someone else is keeping track of the direction. And so most people never stay there long enough to find out what replaces the noise. They return to what is known, to what is shared, to what is safe, without realizing that safety, when prolonged, has a way of softening the edges of intent. This is not a story about isolation. It is not a warning, and it is not advice. It is simply an observation that those who begin to grow in a direction that requires discipline almost always experience the same early signal, a subtle reduction in company, a growing distance from unnecessary conversation, and a quiet discomfort that cannot be explained to anyone else. Most interpret that signal as something being wrong. Very few consider that it might be something finally aligning.
What most people call openness is rarely honesty. More often, it is a reaction to discomfort, a need to be acknowledged, a need to feel accompanied, a need to know that someone is watching. The mind does something subtle when it knows it is being observed. It edits itself, it delays decisions, it softens intentions. Not because the intention was wrong, but because attention introduces influence before direction has fully formed. Plans spoken too early begin to carry weight they were never meant to hold. They invite commentary, they invite comparison, they invite doubt disguised as concern. And slowly, the original reason for starting gets buried beneath reactions that have nothing to do with the destination. Privacy is not secrecy, it is containment. It is the ability to let a thought mature without interruption, to let direction sharpen before it has to defend itself. The moment a goal becomes public, it stops belonging entirely to the person who imagined it. It begins negotiating with expectations, with opinions, with imagined judgment. This is why focus weakens when everything is shared, not because people are malicious, but because every voice, even a supportive one, adds friction to motion. There is power in moving without commentary, in working without updates, in allowing progress to remain quiet long enough to become irreversible. Most people mistake silence for hesitation. They assume nothing is happening because nothing is visible. They cannot comprehend momentum that does not announce itself. But real leverage rarely advertises. It accumulates quietly, out of sight, out of discussion, out of reach. When nothing is revealed, nothing can be pulled apart. When nothing is explained, nothing can be argued against. And when direction is protected early, it no longer needs validation later. This is why those who grow steadily often appear inactive right before a shift becomes undeniable. Not because they were waiting, but because they were working in a place where interference could not reach. Privacy does not isolate, it preserves. It gives thoughts room to become decisions, and decisions time to become actions. And once action has weight, it no longer requires anyone's permission.
Growth does not isolate people randomly. It isolates selectively. As direction becomes clearer, fewer conversations feel relevant, fewer environments feel supportive, and fewer relationships can keep pace without pulling attention backward. This separation often feels personal. It is interpreted as loss, as rejection, as something going wrong, but it is neither. Loneliness is not created by the absence of people. It is created when alignment disappears, when inner standards rise faster than shared expectations can adjust, distance forms naturally. Most people rush to close that distance. They explain themselves. They dilute their pace. They return to familiarity just to feel accompanied again. But familiarity is not the same as direction, and comfort is not the same as belonging. There is a phase in growth where solitude becomes unavoidable. not because others vanish, but because the work requires uninterrupted attention. This phase is quiet, uncelebrated, often misunderstood. But it is also decisive because it reveals whether progress is being pursued for approval or for alignment. Those who endure this phase do not become distant, they become anchored. Loneliness does not last forever, but avoiding it almost always delays growth. When noise fades and external structure falls away, pressure does not disappear. It turns inward. This is where most people retreat, not because the work is difficult, but because clarity removes excuses. Without distraction, patterns become visible. Not just effort, but inconsistency. Not just intention, but avoidance. This internal pressure cannot be shared, cannot be validated, and cannot be escaped through explanation. It demands alignment. Discipline forms here, not as force, but as containment. It narrows attention, reduces reaction, and limits access to what does not serve direction. Those who develop this discipline do not appear intense, they appear controlled. They move according to standards, not moods, according to direction, not reaction. This control does not feel powerful at first. It feels restrictive. But over time, restriction becomes clarity, and clarity reduces friction in every decision that follows.
Eventually, growth stops asking to be understood. Direction no longer waits for permission. Silence no longer feels empty, and privacy no longer feels defensive. Life becomes quieter here, not empty, but intentional. Fewer explanations, fewer reactions, fewer distractions. What remains is precision. This is not a higher place, it is a narrower one. A place where time is protected, attention is guarded, and effort is deliberate. Nothing dramatic announces this shift. No applause, no visible milestone, just alignment. And alignment, once established, does not need to be defended. This isn't content for entertainment. It's a reminder to live with awareness. Take one thought from here and apply it today, not tomorrow. That's how change begins. Train the mind, carry the strength. This is Mindful of Strength for you.